HVAC 360, episode number 69, Commissioning Issues Log. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of HVAC 360. I'm your host, Matt Nelson. This week, we're going to field a listener question. This one comes from Keith. He wanted to know about how to best get to the finish line on a commissioning project. And usually, when he talks about this in his email, he was referring to sort of the issues log and items that need to get tested and looked at again and again. So I thought I'd back up a little bit and talk about what is a commissioning issues log, and a little bit about what should be on it, how should resolve it, things like that. So, but first, before I get to that, I want to thank our sponsor, the Building Commissioning Association. The Building Commissioning Association, if you're in the field of building commissioning, this is really the place to be. The place to network, to learn, to get as much information about commissioning specific things as you can. They have different things in the spring. They have the National Conference on Building Commissioning, which is an excellent place to go and attend and learn things about commissioning. They also have spring webinar series, fall webinar series, and those are you can do that at your place of business, and it's very convenient. Just sign up for those, and it's not too much money. So those would be great. If you want to get further involved, why don't you go and become a member? You can get all this information and all the updates. You can go to the Building Commissioning Association website at bcxa.org. And again, thank you for your sponsorship. All right, so moving on, commissioning issues log. All right, what exactly is it? Well, it's called a commissioning issues log. Some people actually are wanting to call it a commissioning issues and resolutions log, but just because something is more specific and longer doesn't necessarily make it right. I like to keep it short. Commissioning issues log, that pretty much says that you're implying that we got to get resolutions on it. If you're not, then you're not doing it right, and that's really kind of the key issue that we'll get into. But essentially, it becomes your tracking mechanism. It becomes the communication between you and the contractors, and it's also a place for the owner to kind of check in and figure out, how the project's going, what kind of issues are coming up, if there are things that are coming up over and over again, just to be able to identify and kind of take the pulse on what the commissioning process is doing. It's really the thing that probably gets changed the most in the commissioning process. You have the pre-functional checklist and the functional checklist, but really once those get set up, there's not too much change to that. But the issues log is one of those things that's constantly being, items are being added to it, or items are being resolved, and things like that. So what really should this issues log contain? And let's take a step back. Maybe, how do you make one? What do you use? And I've seen a couple different varieties out there, and I want to say that there's one that really is the best. But it's really what works for you. I've used in the past, I've used a Word document. The one thing I like about that is the formatting, the availability, and what you can do with that, and how you can make it look professional, so to speak. There's other programs out there that track issues, and they're some of them are custom in-house pieces that I've seen different companies use, and those work fine, and maybe they're better than the alternative. The one thing I've settled on recently is just using an Excel spreadsheet. That's probably the best way for a couple of different reasons that I can use a issues log. I can get a header and a footer in there. It's not the best. It's not like a Word document. But it allows me to, I guess the one kind of key feature is that you can hide issues. And I think that's very important, that you're able to take issues off the list. You can't do that with a Word document, but you can do it with an Excel spreadsheet or any sort of spreadsheet program that you're using. And the reason that's important is because, if you have a 100-item list and you're trying to, give it to the contractor to make sure that they've got their items done, you want to be able to eliminate things that are already resolved. Because every time anybody looks at the list, it takes mental effort, and it tires them out. It physically tires them out just by looking through all the things that are resolved. You want to be able to clear those out of there so they can focus just specifically on things that are not resolved. Another thing I like to be able to do is a key is going to be putting a sequential numbering system in. That's the basic. There's kind of two setups. I'm gonna split them up by discipline. So I'm going to have a mechanical section. I'm going to have a plumbing section, whatever electrical section you might have. Any of those. Obviously, commissioning is an a la carte kind of system. You can pick any sort of systems and commission that and be that your scope of work. So whatever systems are in your scope of work, make a dedicated area for that. A couple of things that does is it enables you to focus in on, on the engineering side, the engineer only has to look at this block of items. The contractor only has to look at that same block of items. So they're not looking at an entire list that maybe things get mixed up. If they have to sort it, you're pretty much done for. You want to make it as simple as possible. So separate it by discipline, and that works on both the design side and the construction side. And really, so to speak, when you talk about an issues log, a lot of people think about it as a construction-only kind of issue or document. But really, when you take a look at what you have for the design phase, it really is the issues log for the design phase. And then you have an issues log for the construction phase. So essentially, it can be set up the same thing. And in fact, in a couple of cases, I've actually used the same document for one project. And I just kind of, drew a bold line in the document and said, okay, from here down is going to be design, and past this line is going to be construction. So, a couple of times, and I guess the one thing that why it worked for me in that particular case is that there were a couple of items that, during the design review, an engineer might respond to something, and you're like, okay, well, technically, you're right, or you don't believe that they might follow up on it. Not that they would be completely honest, but people get busy and things get skipped. So you want to be able to check on that, and you can mark it as resolved, but you're going to be able to check on that, in this case, in construction, to make sure it made into the bid documents, to make sure it gets caught in the submittal. So those are the type of things that if you keep it all on the same list, you can actually, for yourself, kind of keep that straight in your head. Again, the sequential numbering, I always like to give, instead of saying, breaking it down by a section and listing it, starting from 1 and going to whatever, I like to put a specific name so they actually get each individual tag. So it would be, like for the mechanical section, it would be M1, M2, M3, M4, whatever the issue is. Just because, and the same thing, it kind of relates back to tagging equipment. You want to be able to say, okay, item number, E30, that's what we're talking about. If you say item number 30, you have to specify electrical. Is it a big hassle? Not really, but if you can just use a letter to make your numbering scheme a little bit easier, why not do it? So that's what one thing that I do is in my sequential numbering is I would list them by system and then give that system a specific starting letter. Does that get a little complicated when you're dealing with electrical or technology? What do you pick whatever makes sense to you. But that's just my 2 cents as far as having a sequential numbering system for your issues log. Another column that you'd have on there, so your second column in, might be location. And that's a great to reference either the drawing that you're looking at for the comment, a spec section that you're looking at for the comment, or if in the construction side, that's a place to put the room or the piece of equipment that you're kind of focused on. So that's the next column. Then you want to be able to, finally get to identify the issue. I mean, this is the crux of the situation. What are you really kind of, dinging them on? What are you looking at that you need somebody to take a look at? Identifying issues. These are some of the things you want to keep it like a book title. You want to keep it succinct, and you want to keep it clear, short and clear. Things like flexible duct is too long, or flex duct is kinked, on a mechanical kind of issues log, or something's incomplete. The labeling of the piping's incomplete. These are some of the things that you can identify on the issues log. The next column would be kind of your comment, and which is more of a kind of an explanation. This can get a little bit more wordy, but essentially it's why is it an issue to you? Whether it's not compliant with code, or it's not in line with design or best practices, or it doesn't it won't work. Simple enough. That can be another column, and typically those two columns, your kind of your book title and the explanation, those are going to be identifying the issues in your comment. Next column that you can have, and this is really optional. I don't have this most of the time, but I have seen it, so I'll mention it. You can have a benefit or consequences. What happens if this thing doesn't get resolved, or if this issue is untreated? If you had, say, redundant units, and you really didn't need that, or the owner didn't request it, there could be, additional maintenance incurred on a periodic basis that they might not be thinking about, things like that. So this is a place where and I've seen it a couple of times, more especially in the the building enclosure kind of arena, where it may say this has been commonly led to enclosure failures, or this will tend to fail at this point. Which may cause the entire, the wall to be replaced at some point in time in the future. So that's a different one. And the next column would be simply a date issued, when this was issued, and the next column would be by whom. And then once you get past that, you want to be able to identify who's responsible to respond. Whether it's an engineer, whether it's the the architect, or the contractor, or sometimes even by the owner. Sometimes there's specific issues that you want to get on your log that you're saying, hey, what? Here's an opportunity for betterment. It's not in the design, or during the design phase. Hey, you should really consider this. Maybe spending the extra money now is going to save quite a bit of money afterwards. So even the owner can have a chance to respond to this. So that's who you identify in that column. Then you want to be able to say a status, and there's a lot of different things. It can be, it can be new, it can be open, it can be pending, it can be resolved, it can be, closed. A lot of different things, and it kind of depends on what you feel is appropriate. And then the date that it was resolved. You want to be able to track that, saying, okay, it was resolved on such and such a date. Now, everybody having said this, this is kind of just a general kind of what I would put in a commissioning issues log. A lot of people have different want to set them up differently, and that's fine. But I think this is, really the kind of structure that I would give any sort of, whether it be a design phase, whether it be construction phase, issues log, and that's really how I would set it up. So use that as a starting point, and frankly, can you change it? Absolutely. If something makes sense to you, if you learn something that is more helpful for you, go ahead. Don't feel limited in what you're doing with your issues log. You want to be able to make it functional and make it work for you. So the question then becomes, and this was, if you're training anybody, what goes on the issues log? And I think that things that I would think go on the issues log are things that involve money, things that involve coordination, and things that are really differences in design, or maybe things that are omitted, things of that nature. So obviously, money implications, that kind of speaks for itself. Coordination between trades, you want to be able to identify that so people can get that resolved quickly. And obviously, if it's different from what the design says, that needs to be addressed sooner than later. So what does not go on the issues log? And I think that's kind of important. Really, a lot of times you get these general notes, or you get really nitpicky, and you don't have you're really trying to validate your existence as a commissioning authority, because realistically, you would think that I get paid by the pound of my report. And that's not necessarily the case. I think that you want to focus your efforts on things that are very critical, that are have value, and you want to be able to kind of pick your battles. And this kind of ties in a little bit to getting to the finish line. If you have a 100 line items, 100 issues, and you start to have little nitpicky ones, and they're not going to want to respond to it. They're not going to. I've had situations where in other projects I've heard this happen, that cleanup. Hey, there's a pop can on top of this ductwork. Okay, explain why that really matters. That's more of a cleanliness item. Does it really affect? Should it be on the commissioning issues log? No, it's not that important. That's really somebody else's job. If it's like, debris in the air handling unit, okay, maybe that, gets into the realm of what we want to talk about. But generally speaking, don't put that on the list. Certain gray items, when you think that, you're playing Monday morning quarterback and you think, it would have been better to do this. No, you're really enforcing the design, not your own opinions. You want to be able to help the situation out, and realistically, you don't want to be arguing means and methods with a contractor or challenging an engineer. I mean, this gets into this argumentative phase where it really kind of leaves a bad taste in the mouth of the engineers and the contractors, having to go through the commissioning process and having this argumentative phase. Are they really going to want to fill out the documents that you provide for them if you're getting into this adversarial, process? No, it's not. It's just not very good. It's not a good place to be. It's not a good place to drive your commissioning effort. So I would leave those things off. I say in general, if it's an item that really shouldn't be on your list, like it got on there, like you said, okay, you know what, I put this on my list. I've had a change of heart. I've talked to some people. It's not a big issue. Why don't you take it off? You can resolve your own issues. I mean, it's not a great thing to do, but just close the issue. Say, you retract it. Don't ever necessarily take it off your list. Like, hey, it never existed. Just say, give an explanation, resolve it, and have done with it. So that's a couple of different things of what should be on and off this list, and what it gets to create it. Now let's get into more of Keith's question. How do we get to resolution? So, and Keith, I appreciate your question, and if anybody else has questions out there, feel free to shoot them over to me, matt@buildingx.co, or you can actually put it in the go to buildingx.co, and there's a comment section where you could actually contact me with any questions that you might have. All right, before I get into the resolution, I want to just kind of bring it into the and talk to the contractors and engineers out there. A couple of things that you want to do. You want to be proactive. I mean, understand that when you're involved in the commissioning process, you're going to have this commissioning issues log, just like you have submittals to submit, just like you have certain other obligations of paperwork that you have to do. You know that it's out there. Go ahead and request it. You want to keep your commissioning authority honest. You want to keep them engaged, and you want to be able to keep this moving forward. You don't want to have it land on your feet and say, "Hey, you're holding up the process." You want to be able to go out there and say, hey, this is one of the things that you're going to need to get. You can ask for, hey, what's the commissioning issues? Where's the issues log at? Is there anything that you need from me? Be proactive about it. That way you can get your job done quicker. And when you do get it, just get it done. Respond to it. Respond to all the items. Frankly, on the commissioning authority side, flipping that over, if they respond to an item, or if there's an issue that you put on your list that you just kind of want to kind of bring to their attention, but you don't necessarily want a response, or you don't think that there needs to be a response, I've done it before. I just put no response, no response needed. And typically that's for, if I see something like a drafting error, that's going to be confusing to the contractor, I'll put that on there, saying, hey, you know what, pick this note up, or hey, this shows up twice, or it, clean this up. And I'll say no response needed. That way it kind of releases the obligation for them. Hopefully they look at it and say, okay, you know what, I'll pick that up, and they can use it as a list. Another thing is, it's okay to disagree. Frankly, it's the means and methods of the contractor. It's the engineer's responsibility. Not saying that you want to be soft on this, but you really, if they say, you know what, I disagree with you, guess what? And that goes for the engineers too. If you see something on the issues log that you say, you know what, I don't agree, your response can be, I disagree with you, and I'm going to leave it as it is designed. And that's okay. That's, hey, at least we've had that discussion. That's the important thing, that you have the discussion. If there's something that the commissioning authority sees that he doesn't like, he brings it to the attention of, whoever the responsible party is, and they can have that discussion. They can read it, they can go back and forth, and they can say, okay, you know what, it's good how it is, but, I appreciate your input. And that's okay. That's, it's okay to disagree. So here's what I've seen a couple of times as far as the the commissioning authority goes. I mean, how these play out in the end, and really, you want to be able to, like I said, get it done as quickly as possible. The commissioning authority, you want to be able to bring it to their attention as soon as possible. The worst thing that you can do is wait until the end and give them a big long list of issues. So don't make it your fault that the contractor is dragging his feet. And also a lot of times it's, you want to be able to have those conversations, build those relationships with the engineers, with the contractors, just to be able to, have a good working relationship that you can call them up and say, hey, where's it at? And not have this official documentation saying, I request that the general contractor, or the construction manager, give me the status of the list. You want to be able to say, hey, you know what, what about these 3 items? Did they get resolved? Yes, no. You want to have a good working relationship, not only with the engineer, with the project manager for the contractor and the superintendent for the contractor. I mean, really, you can take your issues log, go to them, and say, sit down and say, hey, are you going to address these issues? Are these issues relevant? What are your thoughts? And get their input. Sometimes, and that gets into the whole realm of, hey, you know what, that's the way we've always done it. I don't see a problem with it. And if it's kind of a gray area for you, you might choose to kind of take it off the list and resolve it. But realistically, a couple of different things that, there's really kind of a couple of different resolutions, or a couple of different things that happen on the end of a project. It's what I refer to as holding up the boat, and this is what you get no resolution. So what you have is a commissioning authority that hands over a list at the end of a project and won't do anything until they get it resolved. Say, for instance, you're doing your installation inspections and you refuse to go and do your functional testing until this list is 100% complete. So you're really, deadlocked as far as, getting this, result wrapped up. There's also the tennis match where you're kind of going back and forth, with, hey, you know what, the contractor lost the list, the dog ate my homework, send another email, going back and forth, and you're trying to get this thing resolved. Hey, what's the latest? Can I get the latest? And they just go back, and it's kind of more delay tactics for them to be able to kind of push this off further and further. And then there's the throwing in the towel, saying, you know what, I'm not going to do anything, or just, and this is similar to the holding up the boat, except throwing in the towel says, you know what, you have the list, I'm not getting responses, and they will be unresolved, and you just label them as unresolved. This is kind of the least desirable thing. Obviously, your bread and butter as a commissioning authority is getting a commissioning issues log out there, getting it resolved, and obviously, the fourth way is the right way, which is that getting it resolved and having those things all wrapped up at the end of the project, so there's no loose ends. So those are the kind of different ways that these end up at the end of a project. So on the design side, a couple of different things. You don't really have any recourse over the designers. How can you make this better? On the design side, when you do your design phase issues log, you don't have that recourse with the engineers. Because there's really, the contract is with the engineers might have a contract with the architect, with the owner, and realistically there's nothing, tied to getting this resolved, unless there's a way that you can work it into their contract. But typically you're hired way after they are, so this issue isn't even kind of relevant. And really the best thing you can do at this point is just to get him in a meeting and have him commit to saying, hey, you know what, are you going to, a meeting with the owner and say, hey, you know what, here's the issues log. When can I expect responses by? I need responses for these issues to be able to kind of close out my work. When can I get them? And just kind of get them on the record. And if it make sure that it gets it into the meeting minutes, so that they're on record for saying, hey, yes, I will do that. Because once you get it in the meeting minutes and they agree that they're going to do that, then it really becomes on them. That's more binding to them than anything else. On the contractor side, how can you get a contractor to be more responsive? Aside from making nice with them and getting to know them on a regular basis and not kind of showing up unannounced and getting 100 issues on a log and then handing it over to them. So what can you do to better do that? A couple of things that I've noticed and really get it as part of the schedule of payments. If it is tied into what they need to do, since you typically are hired before the contractors, this way you can kind of work with the general contractor, the construction manager, and get that into their schedule of values, that they're not going to get paid an X number of percent if they're not completing the issues log, or you can even extend it to any sort of other paperwork like the pre-functional checklist if that's something that you have them do. Have it linked to money, because obviously money talks. They're very responsive to getting paid in that respect. So do that. If you can't do that, there's really not too many other recourses. Obviously, you want to be able to get it to them as soon as possible. If you wait until after you're doing the commissioning, and here's you think like a contractor. If they're doing a job and they have men on site, putting somebody on this task of doing something, not a big deal. But if they've actually demobilized as they've left the site, they've taken their tools and their toys and they've gone home. If they've demobilized, and this is if you get it, when you're doing the functional testing and they're already gone, there's not going to be that much of a recourse to them. So that's why you want to be able to get involved early in the project. Have a discussion with them. Talk to people as you find items. Whether it's the whoever the site manager is, GCCM, or it's the different trades. Obviously, you're going to be able to talk to the superintendent every time you're there to say, hey, you're looking good, or what about this? And then you can have those issues discussed over that. And that way, even though you don't give them the list then and there, you formalize that list and then you get it after the fact. So you want to make sure that happens. So those are kind of your opportunities. A couple of things that you can do as far as the return trips back and forth. Typically, I like to think of it as, I'll find it once. That's, obviously my cost. I'll, review the fix, and that's, my cost. But if I have to come back and check on it a second time, I want that to be on the contractor. And realistically, if you write that into the specifications, that way, that's some issues resolution. And really you end up back charging the contractor for that. Typically, back charging is something that contractors do, all the time. It's something that they're familiar with. It's a mechanism that they use. To say that I've ever used it, I can't say that I have. I've usually been able to resolve the issues one way or the other without having to result in back charging. But this is one of the things when you have that kickoff meeting, that's going to be very critical that you actually say, okay, here's what it is. Does everybody understand? Get them to nod. Have them in the meeting minutes saying that everybody understands. Here's what's in the specifications. If I have to come back and check it a second time, it's going to be on you. If you want it to be the third time, fine. But be specific, and if you do it, you need to enforce it. Because if you don't enforce it, then legally you've kind of given up your right to be able to charge them. And your time is money. You want to be able to, spend as much time on the site figuring out, how can I make this project better? How can I identify things that aren't quite right? How can I help the owner get a better, the best possible building they can? You want to be able to spend your money wisely and not kind of going back and forth. And again, if you build that relationship up in the beginning of construction, you don't have to get to the end and have this adversarial relationship with somebody that you really don't know. You know the person. You say, okay, you work it right. You know the person. You can get it resolved. You're working back and forth. Obviously, the more you talk to them, the more they'll say, hey, you know what, I'm gonna be, leaving the site on this date. Can I get your list? And you want to be able to provide that for them. You want to be able to kind of clear out any sort of, items for the mechanical. You might have the temperature controls of the balancer. They can still have issues logs, issues items, after that. But again, once they're not on the site full time, it takes, they're taking them away from something else that they need to be doing. So if they can get a list that's very focused, and that's why it needs to be not general, it needs to be very specific on what they need to do. Again, that's kind of like having a design that's vague. You don't want the contractors to think too much. You want to be able to give them specific items that they can fix. What do you want me to do? Okay. And it's not that you're directing work. It's that you're kind of saying, okay, you know what, you missed this. All right, I'll add this because it's on the design documents. You're really, pointing things out that they missed, really, as opposed to, changing things. So that's kind of how I see the issues being done. Obviously, also aside from the contractor, you want to get you want to become friends with the general contractor, the commissioning or the construction manager, whoever's on site, so that they're there every day talking to these contractors, doing the weekly superintendent meetings. They're the ones that can really kind of keep it on task and really get them to finish these up. If you say, hey, here's my list, I've talked to the contractor, you sit down in their meetings, you can get these things resolved. But resist the urge to go in again and again. There's obviously scenarios where that's going to eat up your bottom line, and you want to be able to make a profit and on doing these projects. That's all there is to it. But I think that's a couple of things that you want to be able to do. All right, so that is kind of getting to resolution. Hopefully, Keith, that answers your question. At least gives you a little bit of more perspective about this difficult task. And I mean, really, it is one of the most difficult tasks to be able to get your issues logs resolved. I mean, if you want people to do work, you have to be able to kind of, make it easy for them. There again, making it concise so they don't have to search for what they need to get done. Making it very succinct, very clear on what they need to do, and make sure that you give it to them in a reasonable time frame. They're going to be looking for, things that typically happen in the construction industry. You're going to have punch lists. You're going to have above the ceiling punch lists for the engineers. You're going to have a final punch list for the engineers. And so you want to be able to time it at least, because they want to, the CMs and the GCs, they have these lists that tend to get resolved at about the same time. If you can get in before that and kind of get it to be coincident with that, to make sure that you get them wrapped up at certain stages, that's probably the best to be able to do that. This is also one of the reasons why, as far as getting these issues resolved and getting in touch with the contractors, that I don't have them do all the pre-functional checklists. If I do, it's kind of a bonus. If they do, I should say. If they do this on their own accord, great. If they don't, I'm more than happy to check some of the larger equipment. I'll usually task them with just the smaller equipment that gets repetitive after a while. That's kind of impossible for me to check. If I'm going to sample, say, VAV boxes, I'll have them check out all the VAV boxes. So, but other than the air handling units, there's some questions I'll kind of review, my installation checklists with them, and to make sure that these pieces of equipment are ready for functional testing. But I'm going to get my eyes on these pieces of equipment anyway. So why not go ahead and take that? Obviously that's not your industry standard. I understand, but if you're minimizing the amount of work that the different contractors have to do, one, they'll appreciate it a little bit, hopefully, and two, it enables them to focus on the stuff that you really want responses to, which is the issues log. The rest is more of a documentation, that making sure that everything got installed correctly and that's ready for functional testing. So that is my 2 cents. The one thing I will say is beyond resolution. So what happens? What do you do with the list after you have it? Now, here's a big discussion, or a little bit of controversy that I've heard kind of both sides on. But here's a question for you: how do you validate the value of your commissioning services? One way I propose to you is to take your issues log and to put a price on it. I'm not saying that you price everything, the issues log per se, but price the items that are on it. Is this going to be an exact price? No. But at least it provides a point of discussion, a point of departure, so that you can say, hey, you know what? Again, I found these 100 issues. Here's a price for each one of these issues. And then you come up with a total benefit to the owner. And, can they argue it? And again, this is not hard and fast. This is not, contractual. Some of these things are very, very loose. But at least it provides a point of departure, even if it's like a range. Like it can be anywhere from X number of dollars to X number of dollars. It could be, 50% of my fee to 150% of my fee. So it could be anywhere in that range, that the value that I've provided for you. But I think that's important to have that. And I've heard that from, obviously Chuck Dorgan I was talking to the other day. He feels, that this issues log needs to be developed like that. And you can kind of do that a couple of different ways, as far as, what would cost if a issue was not resolved and it was, it ended up breaking, what would it cost to do that emergency repair? And then there would be another way to, what would it cost just to kind of have somebody come out and fix it after the warranty was up? So I guess, say for instance, talk about an example. A freestat was a great example. Again, there's two ways you can think about it. What it would cost to, if a freestat was improperly installed, what would it cost to actually go back in there and install it properly? Okay, well, it'd be, just to have proper protection. There'd be that one cost to it. Okay, what if you didn't do that and the coil froze and it burst? What would it cost in repairs? I mean, and that's where you can think of, okay, well, to get a new coil, do you replace the whole coil? Are you able to repair it? A new coil might cost a couple $1,000. Getting it installed, maybe another couple $1,000, depending on where it's at. Do you have to cut it out? Do you have to, what kind of gymnastics do you have to do? What kind of downtime is this going to be critical? What happened to the water? Did it actually leak into, spaces below? Was there a loss in productivity? What kind of manpower, especially with, even in-house maintenance, how much time do they have to spend? So there's a lot of kind of variables that you really can't get exactly. But, there again, it provides, if something were to happen, and it might not, and again, it's just kind of speculation on what could be. If you had 10 air handling units and they all had the freestats put in the wrong way, do you get to count that 10 times? That can be a significant amount of money. That would, as far as if all of them broke at once. Well, maybe you say, just 10%. And, and kind of work the number from there. But at least you have some value. At least it's not like, okay, here's my report, and the plop value of that report. There's really not much to that. So you want to be able to validate in a couple different ways. Some people say, you know what, I'm going to validate my commissioning effort on energy savings. That I'm going to be able to take it at the end, take the project to the end, and I'm going to do little tweaks, and I'm going to save certain money, energy, and I'm going to do my energy calculations. That's pretty safe. As far as what you want to do. But realistically, the way I think about it is that's a task that's kind of set at the end. What kind of value are you bringing to the whole process? If you want to really kind of, express that to somebody, say, in the design, I caught X, Y, and Z. So you bring me in as early as you can because I'm going to catch more, and those items are going to be significant. Maybe compared to some of the items that I can find in construction, and that's kind of the value that you can kind of present to them, and the picture that you can kind of paint. That I'd like to say, that is really important. Another example of this, the freestat one. I can go either way, and you can see how that number is highly variable. But say, for instance, your boiler flues. If your boiler flues were right next to your outside air intake for your air handling unit, well, what would it cost to actually move that? And you can get some pretty hard numbers to actually moving that after the fact, because obviously that's a code issue, and you want to be able to remedy that. So if you caught that in design, had them moved, guess what? This is you could get a pretty accurate number, a pretty solid number, and that's something that really couldn't be argued with too much, because it's it's going to happen. It's a really kind of real example of value that you bring, rather than having a freestat potentially bust a coil and cost tens of thousands of dollars to actually repair. So those are some of the things, again, getting beyond the resolution to actually providing value to your commissioning authority services. And that's pretty much all I have for this week. So thanks for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. You're doing a great service to your mind in spending a little time. Hopefully you'll learn something today. Just one thing can I actually make a big impact. So hopefully there's some actionable things here you can do and apply to your commissioning authority life or your engineering life or your contractor life. So I appreciate each and every one of you. You are the smart 3% that are out there looking for that continuing education and growing your mind. Also like to thank the Building Commissioning Authority, Building Commissioning Association for their support of HVAC 360. I really appreciate that. Best thing you can do for me, there's a couple of things. If you like the show, pass it on. We love to have additional listeners. That's where we're trying to grow the show and trying to get more people involved in listening and growing, because this is such a big issue out there. And if you haven't gone back to episode number 0, where I talked to why I'm doing all this in the first place, you can go ahead and do that. Alternatively, you can. Most of you listen to me either via a iPod device, iTunes, iPhone. So you can go into the iTunes store and actually make a review. Give me a review. Give me a rating. I'd appreciate each and every one of you that did that, and I'll even give you a shout out as a bonus. So I appreciate that. Again, thanks, Keith, so much for that question. I think it was really a great question, and something that, it literally plagues commissioning authorities. If you're a commissioning authority, you will run into this, and this will be an issue for you, and you need to find a methodology and a way to be able to resolve this issue in your practice. So take some time, think it out. If you have any comments on the show, please let me know. Or, if there's something that I missed or something that you do that makes it better, I'll certainly be willing to kind of mention that on future shows. You can pass it along. Send me any email, either through the show at buildingx.co or go to send me an email via matt@buildingx.co. So that's it. Twitter @buildingx. And LinkedIn, Matt Nelson PE. I always like to connect with some of the listeners. So that's it for this week. Enjoy your time in the industry. Enjoy your vacations. Enjoy your work. And always remember to know what you build and share what you know.